Okay, so hello again, class. For this recording, we're going to talk about the types of assessment. Okay, this is directly after the two principles of assessment that we have talked about. Okay, by Gravels 2014. Okay, so in this case, in this juncture, we're going to talk about the two types of assessment that are suggested by DepEd, which are the formative and summative assessment. Now, before we move on to that, there's also actually three more assessments that are suggested by Gravels in 2014. Okay, so aside from the formative and summative assessment that are suggested by DepEd, okay, Gravels added that there are initial assessments, diagnostic assessments, and holistic assessments. Okay, sinabi rin ni Gravel na taliwas sa naunang mga definition natin, assessments may be formal or informal. Okay? When we say formal ang assessment, it means the scores in the assessment will contribute to the grades of the learners. And ang informal assessment naman, this is basically you tracking the learners' learning at any given point in the lesson. Okay? Siyempre, pag informal, this is not to be part of their grades. Okay, so let's dive right into the types of assessment. Okay, first we have initial assessment. Okay, so according to Gravels, this types of assessment aims to give teachers relevant information about the learners regarding their specific assessment requirements or needs. Kasama na rin dito yung pag-identify kung nasatisfy ba ng isang estudyante yung mga tinatawag na course prerequisites. Okay? So for example, sa inyo, future teachers, okay, you will take your practice teaching at some point in time. Now, sa practice teaching, kailangan meron ka mga papeles in order to proceed. These papers include yung inyong pregnancy test, yung inyong medical exam, and yung PhilHealth, aside from others na pwedeng i-mandate sa inyo. Okay? So, itong mga papers na to, sine-check muna, ina-assess muna if you have it and if you have passed these tests, okay, before actually proceeding, before actually enrolling to practice teaching. Okay, now kasama rin sa initial assessment yung pag-assess ng mga perceptions, motivations, and even expectations ng iyong mga learners para sa iyong course. Okay, so yung lahat ng mga yon ay under sa initial assessment. So, yung iba sa inyo, tinanong ko, ano yung expectations nyo sa subject? Okay, so ano yung aasahan ninyo sa subject na ito? Some of you have given me good answers, some of you have given me confusing answers. But then again, the point is, you do initial assessment to establish kung ano ba yung inaasahan ng mga learners at kung karapat-dapat nga ba sila doon sa course na iyon. Okay? So next, we move on to, of course, it's still initial assessment. Sabi ni Gravels, initial assessment can allow for differentiation in individual requirements to be met. Okay, so there are some cases where some students are required to pass additional papers in order to get to a course. Okay, so one example of this is yung mga foreign students natin. Okay, so if a foreign student wants to move here in the Philippines to study, of course, yung mga requirements sa local students, they are wildly different sa mga requirements ng foreign students. Okay? So that's one example of how initial assessment can actually identify yung mga pagkakaiba-iba na ito. Okay? Ascertain why the learner wants to take the program. Okay? Kasama na rin dito yung pag-alam kung may kapasidad ba sila na matapos yung program na iyon. Okay? Kaya minsan, when I'm asking you, do you really want to be a teacher? Because these are the things that you can expect. Okay? Baka kasi dumating yung point na hindi nyo rin pala kayang masikmura yon, medyo sayang din yung inyong pag-aaral. But nonetheless, those things are actually hard to see at the beginning. Because just like you, class, I'm also unsure whether I wanted to be a teacher or not. Okay? But along the way, you get the knowledge, you get the skills, you get the techniques that you need to do or that you need to have in order to teach properly. Okay, so that's why we are here to guide you in that particular journey. Next, find out the expectations and motivations of your learners. Okay, I've already told you about this earlier. Okay, next, give your learner the confidence to negotiate suitable targets. Okay, so there are some targets in a class, okay, that you need to talk to your teachers to. Okay, especially kung may mga problems pa dyan. Okay, paano pag medyo mahirap palang maabot? Pag hindi pala kaya ng students, maybe you can negotiate with the teacher to lower the requirements. Okay, or di naman kaya modify it a bit to suit your needs. Okay, identify any information which needs to be shared with colleagues. Okay, so pag may estudyante kang problematic, pag may estudyante kang may special needs, pag may estudyante kang merong immediate and emergency needs, okay, parang yung mga may asthma, diba? That can be a problem at some point in time. Okay? Now, syempre, meron din tayo ibang mga students na merong, what do you call this? Problem with their attitudes, okay? That can also be one of the things that you need to say to your colleagues, okay? Identify any specific additional support needs, okay? Kung yung bata, kailangan ba merong medkit na naka-ready, okay? Kung meron ba naka-ready na insulin, meron ba naka-ready na kung anong medical expenses, etc., etc. Kung mangangailangan ba siya ng mobile data para sa isang klase, kung mangangailangan ba siya ng iba pang special equipments and the like. Kasama po lahat ng iyon sa initial assessment. Okay? Next, we have diagnostic assessment. Okay? Ito yung siguro nadaanan nyo na nung high school, yung mga tinatawag na diagnostic tests. Okay? So, kung initial assessment, it assesses the motivation and expectations of the learners for the lesson. Okay? Ang diagnostic assessment ay nagtetest ng kanilang skill before beginning the program. Okay, sabi dito, it allows teachers to identify a learner's current skills, knowledge, and understanding. Okay? Pwedeng isa itong test, pwedeng isang performance, etc., etc. Okay? Now, you do diagnostic tests according to Gravels in order to identify kung anong mga specific aspects ng lesson na connected sa course mo yung kailangan pang i-improve. Okay? Because there will be times na yung mga nakaplano sa lesson natin ay sobra na palang madali para sa mga learners natin. There can be times like that. But a lot of times, maaaring yung mga nakaplano nating assessments, advanced na pala sa learners. So in that case, anong gagawin? We need to build up the more basic, the more prerequisite requirements for our assessments. Okay? So that's one of the functions of diagnostic assessment. Okay? Now, according to Gravels, diagnostic assessment can also ascertain learning preferences. Okay? So it can give you an idea, okay, kung paano mas ma-express ng learners yung kanilang learning. Some learners can be good with performance but can be bad with tests. Okay? Something like that. Okay? Enable learners to demonstrate their current... Okay, ito na yung pinaka-idea nga, di ba? You diagnose the current skills of the learners. Okay? So yung pinaka-main function ng diagnostic assessment. Okay? Ensure learner can access support such as study skills. Okay? In this case kasi, okay, pag nakita mo na yung learners ay merong problem with doing basic tasks. Okay? Alam mo na, as a teacher, supposedly, ideally, alam mo kung saan siya makakahanap ng resources to improve on these basic skills. Kasi merong mga bata na talagang mahuhuli. Okay? The problem is, in a realistic setting, hindi natin laging kaya na i-fill up yung kanilang lacking. So, ano gagawin natin? We give them support. How? Give them resources to actually learn on their own. Okay? Next, identify an appropriate starting point and a level for each learner. Okay? So, bawat learner, of course, iba-iba po yan. Karamihan sa kanila, Okay? Nasa average, obviously. Merong mga advanced na, and then merong mga mahuhuli. Okay? Now, dito papasok yung idea na tinatawag na differentiated instruction and at the same time, differentiated assessment. Okay? However, again, mahirap pong gawin iyon, lalo na sa isang sa isang realistic na klase ng mga 50, even 60 students in a single classroom. Okay? But as much as possible, okay, sa mga matatalino sa klase natin, we give them advanced resources for them to browse on their own. Pag gusto nila, i-browse nila. And of course, sa mga medyo nahuhuli, we do the same. We give them easy resources para makasunod din naman sila. Okay? Always remember, class, that even no matter how many resources we give our students, if they do not have the motivation to actually learn it on their own, it's quite useless. Okay? Next, identify gaps in the learning of the learners. Okay? Now, when we set assessment, one of the ways we can set our objective is to identify the current skills of the learners and identify our end goals. Okay? Yung bridge sa gitna ng dalawang ito, yun yung gap na kailangan nating i-address. Okay? So, paano mo malalaman yung gap kung kahit meron kang end goal, wala ka namang beginning? Okay? Yun yung gusto ko establish ng diagnostic test. Yung pinaka-beginning para ma-identify na rin yung gap. And of course, ma-identify mo rin yung previous experiences ng iyong mga learners. Okay? Kung alin ba sa mga experiences na to yung kaya nilang, yung maaari nilang i-transfer sa iba. Okay? Yung maaari nilang maituro sa kanilang classmates or yung maaari maging greatest asset nila sa course na ito. Okay? So, just to give a brief idea on this one. Okay? I myself would be very bad when it comes to drawing. Okay? So, there are times when we are tasked to draw something with relation to instructional materials. Okay? Since hindi nga ako magaling mag-drawing, of course, I cannot do that. Okay? I can try, but it will turn out to be ugly. So, what would I do? I enlist the help of my classmate to draw something for me. Okay? And then my classmate obliged. Of course, since ako may skills din ako na separate sa kanya, there are times when I helped her out. Okay? So, again, ang current environment kasi natin ngayon, it's not exactly on a competitive scale, especially on college. Right now, people are looking for those that can adapt, those that can work properly with others, rather than those that are overly competitive. Okay, while competition is good for innovation, it is not exactly your ingredient for everyday productivity. Okay, so finally, sabi dito, it is used to identify specific requirements. Okay, now there are some courses, there are some subjects that have prerequisites na hindi nakasulat sa kanyang formal documents. Okay? Katulad ninyo. Okay? Sa assessment of learning, walang prerequisite. However, meron tayong mga tinatawag na unstated prerequisites. Like, dapat marunong kayo mag-add and subtract. Dapat alam niyo yung ibang mga terms sa eduk na gagamitin. Okay? Dapat alam niyo kung ano yung mga topics sa inyong subjects. Okay? Yun yung mga prerequisite na hindi sinasabi, but still, they will be required in our class. Now, remember when I ask you, what do you remember from your childhood and adolescent development? Okay? Hindi yun official prerequisite. But, a lot of the things that you have learned in that subject can be used in this particular course. Kaya po, meron po tayong diagnostic assessment for that. Okay? So, those are the uses of diagnostic assessment according to Gravels. Okay? Now, let's move on to formative assessment. Formative assessment can take on two different forms according to DepEd. This is when you do assessment for learning, which is when the teacher adjusts the learning process based on the results of an assessment. Okay? And you have assessment as learning, where students reflect on their own learning. Now, ang assessment for learning, usually ginagawa yan before, during, and after. Okay? So during the class, magagawa mo ang formative assessment whenever you question your students. Okay, class, can you please define education in your own words? Okay, can you please define what we mean by formal assessment in your own words? Okay, can you give me another example of initial assessment in the classroom? Okay, so those questions are formative assessments na pwede kong tanungin sa inyo kapag nag-face-to-face class tayo. Okay? So, for example, one student said, Sir, ang initial assessment po nagtetest ng current skills ng bata. Okay? Then I'll tell you, I think mas okay yon sa diagnostic assessment. Kasi ang initial assessment more on motivation and perception and course requirements. Okay? So, yung batang na-correct ko, you can expect him or her to remember the correction I made. Kasi merong personal experience, may personal connection, may personal correction and feedback doon sa interaction na iyon. Okay? Now, sabi ng learner, ay, okay, hindi ko na makakalimutan to kasi naituro na ni sir. Okay, naalala ko na to. Ito yung kinorek sa akin ni sir. Okay. Bakit nga ba ako nagkamali? Ano bang iniisip ko ng mga panahon na yon? Okay. Those thoughts, when a student self-reflects, when a student thinks about their own thinking, yun naman ang tinatawag na assessment as learning. Okay? This is when student reflects on their own learning. Okay? Again, assessment for learning, this is when a teacher asks the learners, okay, during, before, and after the lesson. Ito constantly monitor kung meron bang mga lapses sa kanilang understanding. And of course, pag nakita ng teacher yon through assessment for learning, bibigyan niya ng feedback yung mga learners niya. And yung mga learners na naka-receive ng feedback, they will reflect on those feedbacks. They would connect those feedbacks to their experiences to make it more concrete. Hence, assessment as learning. Okay? Kasi natuto na sila. Okay? Imbis na assessment yon, it's assessment that helped their learning. Assessment that contributed to their learning. Assessment as learning. Okay? So, sabi rin ng DepEd, ang formative assessment daw ay characteristically informal and intended to help students identify strengths and weaknesses. Okay? So, kaya nga tayo nagko-constantly asking our students para malaman natin, ay, saan ba mahina itong batang to? Saan ba magaling itong batang ito? Okay? So, however, you can already imagine having 500, 600 students, okay? It can be definitely difficult to identify, to profile lahat sa kanila, okay? Dito papasok yung tinatawag na law of extremes. Okay? Ang pinaka-naalala mo sa klase mo, yung pinaka-makulit, pinaka-magaling, pinaka-matangkad, Okay, sorry, naputol yun. So this is part 2. Again, recalling, formative assessment helps you identify the strengths and weaknesses of each individual students. It can be done before, during, and after the lesson. If done by the teacher, that is assessment for learning, and yung mga self-reflection ng bata that goes under assessment as learning. Okay? So, we now move on to summative. Meron pa pala dito. Sabi dito, yun nga. Formative assessment can be done at any stage of the teaching process and gives the teachers an idea kung effective ba yung pagtuturo nila or hindi. Okay? And one thing, ang formative assessment, saka mo lang siya magagawa if you interact with the students and deliver the feedback. Meaning, your formative assessment will not be complete if the results is not delivered to your learners. Because again, paano makakagawa ng assessment as learning yung mga learners kung hindi naman nila alam kung saan sila nagkamali? Hindi naman nila alam kung yung sagot ba nila ay yun ba ang hinahanap mo? Yun ba ay tama? Yun ba ay appropriate? Etc. Etc. Okay? So again, formative assessment can only be done by interacting with your learners and delivering these results to your learners. Okay? And of course, pwede mo siyang gawin at any part of the teaching process. Okay? Next, formative assessment may be recorded as evidences to show the development of the learners throughout the learning proper. Okay? So, meron po tayong mga formative assessment para sa mga bata na tinitingnan natin, sinusubaybayan natin. Usually, sinusubaybayan natin yung pinaka-extreme nga. Okay? Yung mga pinaka-matatalino to further cultivate them into a more conducive learning culture. And of course, the students on the other end of the spectrum, which we try to recover na makasunod sa iba. Okay? So, formative assessments can help mitigate these extremes sa inyong klase. Okay? So, formative assessment also imbibe learners with accountability and responsibility. Bakit? Pag nakorek mo na yung bata, nagawa mo na yung job mo. Okay? Nabigay mo na yung feedback. Okay? Nabigay mo na yung tama. Okay? Nakasubstantiate mo na sagot nila. The problem is, pag hindi niya pinoses yun, hindi mo na kasalanan. Okay? What you can do is to still try and motivate them, but still, if the motivation definitely is missing, then you cannot do anything. Baka pwede mong gamitan ng extrinsic motivation. Bigyan mo lagi ng candy pag magaling. However, that will eat to into your resources then. Okay? Now, teachers are tasked to give recommendations on improving learner performance. Okay? So, again, ito nga, always the importance of feedback. Kasi, the key to change, the key to getting better is not, what do you call this? It's not being better always. Okay? It's not, what do you call this? Okay. Let me get to the point. The key to getting better is identifying what needs to be changed. Okay? So, yun lang po yung ating formative assessment. And as a side note, formative assessments are recorded, but they will not be part of the grades of the learners. Okay? Why? Kasi tatanungin mo sila out of the blue. Okay? You either check their preparedness, you either check their learning experience. Now, recall na isa sa mga problems natin sa reliability ay yung student factor. If your student is not ready, edi hindi reliable yung magiging performance nila. Kaya hindi natin nire-record yung formative assessment because if we did, that would increase the variability of our assessment results. Okay? Which is a problem in itself. Okay? So, sabi ni Earl, assessment for learning practices aim to close the gap between existing and anticipated learning. Recall that in our diagnostic assessment, we established the gap. Okay? Yung formative assessment, yun yung mag-close sa gap na yun. Yun yung magtatayo ng bridge from your starting point papunta sa pinaka-dulo. Okay? Hence, assessment, okay, AFL to sorry, nagkamali ako ng type. Hence, AFL's main goal is to improve learning all throughout the learning episode. Okay? So, again, nasabi ko na rin kasi kanina that formative assessment is done before, during, and after. Okay? Kaya po, improvement of learning all throughout the learning episodes. Okay? While assessment as learning focuses on basically the student's active role in their learning. Okay? So, again, formative assessment is not exactly teacher-based. It is actually more student-based. Kasi nag-assessment for learning ka para magkaroon ka ng assessment as learning. Okay? Hindi po magkahiwalay itong dalawang aspect na ito. Okay? Kasi saan ba manggagaling yung realization ng bata na mali sila? It can come from their environment. And ikaw ang more knowledgeable other doon sa environment na yun. Kaya, chances are, sa'yo manggagaling yung mga assessments na iyon. And of course, kailangang i-process ng bata yon para magkaroon din sila ng learning. Okay? So, ito ang 5 key strategies of formative assessment according to Mentz and Lube. Okay? So, I will leave the right part for you to read. Okay? Dito ako sa left part. First one is to clarify the success criteria and, of course, your learning intention. Okay? So, one of the things that you need to deliver to your students during the class is, of course, ano ba yung objectives ng lesson. Para may idea sila kung ano yung patutunguhan nila. Okay? So, that's one of the key strategies to improving formative assessment. Okay. Pangalawa, engineer effective classroom discussions and learning tasks that requires an evidence of student understanding. Okay? So, paano ka makakagawa ng effective classroom discussion? Kapag merong interactivity, kapag merong teacher-to-student dialogue, kapag merong active sharing of experiences, okay? Pag merong maayos na motivation, etc., etc. Okay? Now, obviously, right now, you're watching this recording, so hindi lang medyo, talagang limited yung ating interaction. However, I hope that this is still an effective classroom discussion for you. Okay? So, and sabi dito, tasks that elicit evidence of student understanding. Okay? So, how do you do that? You question. Kasi yung mga answers nila, that is already an evidence of their understanding. A short essay, a short reflection paper after the lesson. Mga formative assessment to that results into a tangible output that you can record and that you can also evaluate. Okay? Next, providing feedback. And when you say feedback, constructive feedback. Okay? Hindi yung mga destructive feedback lang, yung mga feedback na dead end. Ano yung mga feedback na dead end? Kaya mali yung sagot mo. Okay? Please improve your answer. Those are dead end feedbacks. Okay, you are correct in this part of your answer. However, this part is more suitable for that part. Okay, that is a better feedback because it shows the learners how to move forward. Okay, oh, that answer is actually more for the principle of reliability rather than validity. Okay, I think you are confusing practicability with authenticity. Okay? Those feedbacks are better because you give them an idea kung saan talaga sila nagkamali. Hindi sasabihin mo lang na literal na mali sila. Okay? Huwag pong ganon. Next, as activating students as instructional resource for one another. The use of group and peer skills. Okay? Sa klase po natin, meron tayong mga natural teachers. Okay? It is our job to make use of the natural teachers in our class. Okay? Because ang estudyante, they can have reservations against the teacher. But they might have less reservations when it comes to the students na. Okay? Baka mas amenable sila sa kapwa nila estudyante, mas makinig sila sa kapwa nila estudyante. So it is imperative to perform group discussions on such settings. Okay? Next, activating students as owners of their own learning. Okay? The use of learning logs and learning portfolios are suggested here. Okay? Kasi kapag meron kang binabalikan na nakikita mo yung progress mo, it can help you self-reflect. Ganito pala yung mga outputs ko dati. Okay? Ang dami palang mali, hindi pala specific. Ay, ang layo pala ng nilagay ko objectives na nakalagay sa curriculum guide. Okay? Those realizations are manifestations of how learners take accountability for their development. And it is a good feeling to see your development all throughout the course. Okay? So some students do this instinctively. As teachers, maybe we need to task our students to actually do one. Okay? Gawa nga kayo ng portfolio, gawa kayo ng reflection paper every time na matapos tayo. Okay, ganito yung mga ilalagay nyo. What you have learned, what you don't understand well, etc., etc. Okay? Those evidences, okay, you can keep them and then you can give them back to the students para magkaroon sila ng self-reflections, ng metacognition regarding these outputs. Okay? So those are some of the strategies for effective formative assessment as suggested by Mentz and Lubeck. Again, the right side is for you to read. Okay? Next, we move on to summative assessment. Now, ang summative assessment, ginagawa lang siya sa dulo ng isang lesson. And actually, ito yung pinaka-pinagkukuhanan natin ng mga grades ng students. Okay? But in the larger scheme of things, what your teachers do with summative assessment is not for the benefit of the student. Okay? It's actually for the benefit of the school, educational institutions. Kasi yung mga summative assessments ninyo, exams, yung mga final grades, while it gives you certifications and evidences of your own learning, it gives us an idea of the quality of the processes and the systems we have in place when it comes to education. Do your grades mean that you are going to pass the lead? Do these grades mean that you are going to find a suitable job? Do these grades mean success in life? Okay? Yun yung mga gusto nating malaman sa summative assessment. Okay? So yung grades, madaling makuha yan. Immediate yung effects. Pag nakapasa ka, pupunta ka sa susunod na course. Pero kung pipilitin namin alamin, yung mga grades niya ba, anong koleyo? Indication ba yun na ganito yung kinalabasan ng buhay niya, ng career niya ngayon? Medyo matatagalan mahanap yon. Kaya, siguro, yung iba nakikita sa summative assessment ay grades lang yan. But no, in the long run, it shows an image of the quality of the educational institution and of course, how your grades, how your learnings translate into real-life usable skills. Okay? And sabi din ng UNESCO TLSF, the summative assessment is for the benefit of the people rather than of the learner. Okay, as this assessment measures if a certain test taker can demonstrate certain skills, okay, capabilities, and knowledge. What do these mean? When we say we are educating, okay, what we are doing exactly is to make you a productive member of the society. In order to be a productive member of the society, you have to show certain skills, knowledge, and capabilities that are beneficial for the common functions of the society. Kaya kapag marunong ka magtrabaho, kapag marunong ka magturo, it's not just for your benefit. It's for the benefit of your future learners, which will then become doctors, become engineers, become factory workers, become the pillars that feed this nation. Okay? So, it's not only for your benefit, but it's for the benefit of the people when you achieve certain capabilities that make you productive in our society. Okay? And sabi din dito, Gravel's remarks the summative assessment has a tendency to teach purely what is required rather than actually practicing them. Which means na ang authentic assessments daw, it's in dire need of authenticity. Okay? Kasi sa summative assessments natin, they usually take the form of an exam. Okay? Ang exam, lalo na ang pen and paper test, chances are, hindi yan gaanong authentic. Kahit ano pang real-life scenario ilagay namin dyan, it will not be as authentic as you making your own lesson plan. It's not as authentic as you actually performing in front of the people. It's not as authentic as you actually teaching. So, yun yung isa sa mga weaknesses ng summative assessment. Aside from the fact na baka masyado siya nagpo-focus sa mga nakalagay lamang sa objectives instead of the tinatawag na hidden curriculum that revolves in our entire educational field. Okay? And the last type of assessment we have is holistic assessment. Okay? Sabi ni Gravels, ang holistic assessment daw, it's a it's a system of assessing several aspects of a qualification, job specification in a simultaneous manner. Okay? So, sabi rin dito, it is characterized by an efficient system, okay, that creates good evidence or has a carefully planned observation. Now, class, whenever you are performing, yung mga prerequisites na nakakalagay sa inyong syllabus, okay, yung mga known prerequisites. Pero in order to do a particular skill, meron din po yung mga prerequisite na hindi natin nasasabi. Okay? What makes an effective teacher ba? Are you effective if you passed all your subjects? Are you effective if you have graduated cum laude? Well, no, not exactly, not always. Because when you function as a member of the society, when you make demonstrations, when you show your skills is actually an amalgamation, a combination, a mixture of all the skills you have learned all throughout your life. Ang holistic assessment, ang balak niya ay i-assess lahat ng skills na to on how your skills that are developed inside the school and outside the school blend into a holistic view of your capabilities. Okay? So that is holistic assessment. Ito actually medyo mahirap gawin. Because how can you measure skills outside of what you have taught? Okay? Magagawa mo siya along the way. Okay? Makikita mo siya when you have experienced the field for yourself. Okay? Kami man, when we are beginning teachers, up until now, we're still beginning teachers naman. There are things we see that makes a good teacher na wala sa amin. There are things we see that makes a good teacher na hindi naman namin naturo. Okay? So when we make assessment to assess these things na hindi namin alam, na hindi namin naturo, that is holistic assessment. To assess you and your skills as an entirety of your learning and personal experiences. Okay? So that is holistic learning. Okay, so in this table by Macmillan, you see there the differences between assessment of learning, assessment for learning, and assessment as learning. Now, yung dalawang on the right, the one on the center, assessment for learning and assessment as learning, we have talked about that under some formative assessment. Ang summative assessment, that is also known as assessment of learning. Okay, so what you see here are their characteristics. Okay, so on the first row, makita nyo, assessment of learning summative, assessment for learning is formative. Assessment as learning is when students are engaged in learning. Okay, of course, summative wants to certify learning. Formative wants to identify kung ano yung mga kailangan mo para ma-improve yung iyong learning. And assessment as learning allows you to monitor your own learning. Ang assessment of learning, ginagawa lang sa dulo ng lesson. Ang assessment for learning, ginagawa siya sa kahit saang banda ng instruction as long as the instruction is still ongoing. And finally, assessment as learning, ginagawa yan usually kapag naibibigay na yung feedback ng formative assessment during a unit of instruction. Okay? Assessment of learning uses normative scoring and nirorank yung mga estudyante. Actually, hindi na yan totoo ngayon. We just get your score nowadays. Okay? Nirorank namin kayo at times na kailangan yung ranking. But now, DepEd do not rank students. Pagpasok ka sa isang criteria na with honors, with high honors, that is your evaluation. Magkakaroon lang ng ranking kapag finals na. Kapag isusulat yung mga pangalan. With highest honors, obviously, hindi mo makikita yung grade, pero ikaw yung unang nakasulat kapag ikaw yung top. Okay? Ngayon nga, bawal na tayo magpakita ng grades ng ibang estudyante. And dapat naman talaga. Kasi, pag pinapakita natin, it can be traumatic for the student na mabababa yung nakuha. Okay? Assessment for learning allows teachers to modify instruction, yes. Kasi pag nakita natin, ay may mali pala sa learning ng bata, edi mag-a-adjust tayo. Assessment as learning emphasizes student knowledge of criteria used to evaluate learning. Okay? Kung alam ba nila kung bakit sila na-mark na tama, kung bakit sila na-mark na mali. Okay? Pag na-mark sila na tama, they will try and improve their answers. Pag na-mark sila na mali, they will go back kung saan ba sila nagkamali. Okay? Assessment of learning draws from materials studied. Okay? So, kung ano yung napag-aralan, yun yung i-question sa summative assessment. Okay? Kaya alam ko yung buwisit ninyo pag nakakita kayo ng question na, ala, bakit meron to sa exam? Di naman tinuro ni sir. Okay? Kasi, ideally, ang summative assessment items magagaling lang sa mga naituro. For assessment for learning, suggest corrective instruction. Okay? Meaning, ko-correct ka lang ng instruction. Magsasuggest ka kung paano ma-improve ng bata yung learners. And kapag nakapag-suggest ka na, of course, sa assessment as learning, pipili na sila kung ano yung pinaka gusto nilang kunin sa mga suggestions mo. Okay? Assessment of learning or summative assessment is general, meaning lahat kasi na napag-aralan mo iti-test. Assessment for learning, specific lang ang tinatanong and specific lang din yung aaralin ulit ng students. Okay? Summative assessment, as I said earlier, hindi siya para sa learners lang. Usually, para yan sa ibang stakeholders, most likely sa parents. Okay? Ang formative assessment used to give feedback to students, and assessment as learning fosters student self-monitoring. Kasi kapag nakapagbigay ka ng feedback, yung bata ideally, imo-monitor niya na yung sarili niya kung nasusunod niya ba yung mga feedback na naibigay mo. Okay? Otherwise, of course, again, that's not our problem kapag di naman nila minonitor yung sarili nila, di ba? Hindi naman tayong lagi lang nagbibigay ng effort, di ba? Huwag ganon, huwag po tayo magpakamartir. Toxic po yun. Okay? Now, summative assessment can decrease student motivation, whereas assessment for and assessment as learning enhances student motivation. Okay? So, assessment of learning, highly efficient superficial testing. Efficient kasi madali mong mako-cover yung maraming fields sa iisang test lamang. Efficient siya. Pero superficial kasi nga nasabi natin kanina, hindi siya authentic. Assessment for learning, in-depth testing. Kasi you probe their learning. Hinuhukay mo kung saan ba sila nagkakamali, kung saan ba yung tama nila. And, of course, sa assessment as learning, testing teaches student. Okay? So, ang summative test, they focus on reliability, whereas assessment for and assessment as learning focus on validity. Okay? So, how does this work? Ang summative kasi, makikita namin sa first grading ninyo, second, third, fourth grading, reliable ba? Okay, consistent ba yung kanyang pagtaas? Consistent yung kanyang pagbaba? Meron bang drastic changes? Yun yung tinitignan namin. Okay? However, on formative assessment, we identify kung ang inyong learning ba, kung ang aming teaching ba, ay nakatutok pa rin doon sa objective namin. Nakatutok pa rin sa pinaka i-assess namin. That's why focus on validity iyon. Okay? Sa summative, delay din yung feedback. Checkin muna yan, to double check, triple check, etc. Pero sa formative assessment, in assessment for and assessment as learning, mabilis yung makukuha yung feedback. Kasi dapat talaga ibigay agad yung feedback for these types of assessment. Kasi mas effective ang feedback only if the student still has it in their immediate memory. Kasi pag narinig mo na mali yung estudyante at hindi mo agad tinama, chances are, makakalimutan na nila yung pagkakamali na iyon. Okay? At pag nalimutan na nila yon, they will consider it as correct. Okay? Or sometimes, they will just be confused kapag nahukay mo ulit. Okay, summative assessment has summary judgments, whereas assessment as and for learning is for diagnostic lamang. Okay? So those are the differences between summative and the two types of formative assessment. So bakit sinabi? Because formative assessment is the current trend in education right now. Okay? There are a lot of studies that focus on the use of formative assessment rather than summative assessment. Okay? Because marami na tayong established studies kung anong mga aspeto ng grades yung makaka-connect sa success, etc., etc. Right now, what we want to focus is to actually increase the quality of the students. And how do you do that? Of course, hindi lang summative. Dapat formative din. Now, you can imagine, can you do that with a lot of students? Realistically, it would be near impossible. Kasi teacher lang tayo, tao lang din tayo, napapagod lang din tayo. But in an ideal environment, okay, when you have the power to do so, when you have the resources to do so, please focus on formative assessment. Okay? So again, the 5 types of assessment, we have initial assessment, okay, to check for the expectation, perception, and the initial requirements. Diagnostic assessment is to check for the current skills of the learners and to identify the gaps between their current skill at sa gusto mong maabot nila. Formative assessment is for improving the learning and to give the students the ability to monitor their own learning. Summative assessment is for general assessment to assess their entire learning, assessment of learning. And panglima, holistic assessment, assessing not only what is taught in the classroom but all of the learning experiences and personal experiences you have reached. Okay, so that is our discussion for the different types of assessment. Okay, so that is all for the recording today. I hope you have learned something from this recording. If not, please watch it again, maybe more slowly. Okay, so I'll see you all in the next recording or hopefully in our next face-to-face class na. Okay, bye class.